Registers. Our topic for today is registers, and it's also another question we often get, especially when coaching people who have had some singing training before, coming from other methods and approaches. They've spent a lot of time working with the notion of registers and are a bit confused how it fits in with CVT. So today we're aiming to look at different things that affect people's perception of what a certain register is. And sometimes, in some cases, it's just one of those concepts that people associate with registers. And sometimes it's all of those concepts together that people, think of when they say chest voice or head voice or falsetto, or, so many other names for those. Modal voice, M1, M2, so on.
I think we've talked briefly about this before, but there's often a lot of confusion when it comes to thinking in certain registers, since you're often able to make sounds that sound a certain way but feel differently than you would expect, and suddenly you kind of lose that sensation that you're in a specific register because you're producing a sound that for you sounds like it should be something when it feels different. It
Yep.
should feel different than it does, if you know what I mean. So, it's definitely an interesting topic, registers.
And we had video on the notion of mixed voice and how it correlates to CVT concepts already.
Exactly, yeah, that's
So
what I was
that's
referring
also
to.
something to check out. So that's just about that specific idea. But so more broadly, I think we can separate the notion of register into different categories in CVT, and we can talk about density, so kind of how thick the vocal folds are in certain sounds, into pitch, so how low or high pitches affect our perception. Then in sound color, so is the sound darker or brighter? And also the amount of metal, is something non-metallic, so neutral, or metallic, so either curbing, overdrive, or edge. And we'll break down those specific things now. First of all, we can talk about density, and we did also talk a little bit about it in earlier videos, so it kind of relates to how thick our vocal folds are for a given pitch. So there are several different ways of controlling pitch. There's elongation of the vocal folds, so stretching of the vocal folds, but you can also get the same pitch by tensing the vocal folds more rather than stretching them. So in CVT, we have these three density areas. We have fuller density, we have reduced density, and we have falsetto. And for example, on the same pitch, the vocal folds will be shorter in fuller density than in reduced density. And just to give some sound examples, fuller density sound would be like, "Hey!" Then a reduced density sound would be like, "Hey!" And then a falsetto sound at the same pitch would be like, "Hey!" That's one of the factors that people factor in when talking about registers. So the fuller one, "Hey!" being called, chest voice. And then the thinner one, the falsetto one especially, it's called falsetto in CVT, I should mention. Some methods make a difference between head voice and falsetto, and that's something we can also get into in a little bit. But it's called falsetto in CVT. So that's the hey, hey. There's a very influential study on laryngeal vibratory mechanisms. And basically, generally, they will say that head voice is M2, what they call M2, which would mean falsetto in CVT. But then they make an exception for something called male operatic head voice. which we'll get to in a little bit with pitch, which they will say is M1, so which could be either fuller or reduced density in CVT terms.
I personally think that builds on a little bit as well upon what I mentioned earlier on, that it can be slightly problematic to think in specific registers, because you kind of build up an idea that three densities, for example, are something completely separate from each other, or like M1 and M2, and that they should always feel completely different. And there's a lot of nuance throughout your range where the sensation that you have is disconnected from the sound that you're going for. So it can be a disadvantage for your development to think too much in terms of boxes or specific registers. I think this is a problem that CVT with the modes does and the density structure does a good job of structurizing and making a little clearer, a little more, for my personal taste, more logical.
So yeah, definitely, those couple of boxes are, a bit more boxed in, and it's a gradient in reality. It's just that as human beings, it helps us grasp concepts better and helps us structure our practice better if we, separate it into a couple specific places that we can aim for then. But of course, there are literally infinite nuances between those.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's always good when you're working on something that's a challenge for you to simplify it first. And I just think that there is also such a thing as too simplified. And then at some stage you don't progress anymore. You need a little bit more detail, a little bit more nuance to progress. And that's where I think the concept of a gradient is really important. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
So a lot of people will call any high note head voice, regardless of how thick or thin it is, and any low note they will call chest voice. And it plays into this idea of resonance, where you can feel your chest resonating on low notes and your head cavities resonating on high notes. So it's kind of like, if I'm gonna sing low notes, regardless if I do A or if I do hey, it's gonna actually make my chest vibrate. It's sympathetic resonance. So it's actually more linked to pitch than to anything else. Some people would, even if I sing here like a fuller density sound, like hey, they would still call that head voice, even though it's pretty far off from that laryngeal mechanism. So it's not hey, it's much thicker. So some people just connect the idea of registers to pitch and to sort of places where you feel certain cavities resonating, and it's just a fact that bigger cavities will resonate at lower frequencies. It's got to do with wavelengths. So low frequencies have longer wavelengths. So singing at lower pitch will resonate your chest cavity more, which is bigger, and singing at higher pitches will resonate your cavities here, which are smaller, regardless of the laryngeal vibratory pattern. I find that oftentimes people call darker sound colors chestier. If we take the same note and if I do an hey, and then the other one would be like hey, they're both quite dense and metallic, but people would sort of have a tendency to call the first one, like, more chest voice. So that's where I think sound color plays a part on the idea of registers.
This is a phenomena that I've also noticed quite often when working with someone who's maybe learning technique for the first time. They will often refer to notes that are slightly lighter in sound color, and maybe with less metal, like a hey, and they'll say, "Oh no, that was too high, wasn't it?" And you're like, no, the pitch was perfect. It's just you just need more volume, and then and then suddenly, oh no, but that was lower. So it's there's a coordination thing there that correlates as well between. So exactly what you're saying, basically. You know, with less volume, it's higher, and more volume, it's lower. Yeah.
Do you ever have the thing where someone, a beginner singer, is like, "Hey," then you ask them, "Okay, can you sing it louder?" And they're like, "Hey!" Like
Yes.
they go up in pitch so much.
Yes, and yeah. Yeah, and I mean, generally that tends to happen anyway when you're trying out your maximum volume. Once you approach that maximum volume, you just generally tend on your own to get higher in pitch because there's just more space there. There's more volume available.
Yeah,
in the
and
higher
I
range.
mean there's another not so obvious explanation, and it's got to do with subglottic pressure, so air pressure under the vocal folds. So that's the main way. Increasing the subglottic pressure is the main way we add volume. But also, increasing the subglottic pressure raises the pitch. It's one of the ways to raise pitch. So to keep the same pitch, we also have to adjust, so kind of coordinate our vocal folds for lower pitches while adding subglottic pressure to actually stay on the same pitch. So it actually takes quite a lot of coordination for a singer to vary the volume on the same pitch, which is why that's often super difficult for beginners to just go, hey. Then we have, how metal affects the ideas of registers, and it's something that I didn't think about much until last year, where I was recording this band, and there were, several of them doing backing vocals, and then a guy sang something like, hey, and his bandmate said, no, don't do it in head voice, do it in chest voice, and like, hey. So I realized, okay, they're not talking about laryngeal vibratory mechanisms, so not talking about density. They're not talking about pitch because it's the same pitch. They're not even talking about sound color so much because, he doesn't want the sound color darker or anything. They're talking about metal. So people generally perceive metallic sounds to be, quote unquote, chestier than non-metallic sounds. So again, if it's like, hey, that would be perceived as, more chest voice than, hey, which could be perceived as more head voice, while the main difference is, is there metal or not? And then, of course, we've got a combination of all these factors. So, like, quite often when you hear people demonstrating a prototypical chest voice sound versus a head voice sound, they will make the chest voice sound a thicker vibratory mechanism, so usually fuller density. They will go low in pitch. They will make it a darker sound color, and they will make it metallic. So they will go like, "Hey, that's chest voice." And then for head voice, they're gonna go to thinner laryngeal vibratory mechanisms, so falsetto in CVT, some methods might not call it falsetto. They might make a difference between head voice and falsetto, where falsetto is being breathy, but that's not the CVT definition which we're using here. Just a disclaimer. So they will go to CVT falsetto in terms of density. They will go to a high pitch. They will assume a light sound color. And, of course, no metal, because we can't do metal in falsetto. So something like, hey! Those are sort of the polar opposites.
Yeah. And then we have transitions and places where you feel like you need to choose a direction between chest voice and head voice. And this brings me to a case that I had as we were doing our education in Copenhagen at the Institute. I was working with I can't remember if he was a first year teacher or an academist, but I was working with a guy. He asked if I could help him out with a part. He was working on a song, and he was struggling with one particular note. And he just said to me, this one note in this song, it's right where my Passaggio is. It was around, I believe, a D sharp 4. And he said, my Passaggio's there, and I always have to, I always land somewhere that I'm unhappy with. He says, the sound is always either too hard, or I just break into falsetto. And he says, and I can't get the sound that I want. And he said, but yeah, that's just where my Passaggio is. It drives me crazy. And so I thought, okay, how can we solve this? And I said, have you tried using the golden exercise, reducing your volume from a loud metallic sound all the way back through neutral towards falsetto? And he said, that's a good idea. I'll try that. And we just did some exercises together, sort of just below the range and going up a half tone, a half tone, a half tone. And we went, I think, about 3 or 4 notes above, because he was a very skilled singer as well. And yeah, we just did this process right past his Passaggio and past this D sharp 4 all the way up to I think we went up to G4 doing this exercise. And then we just went straight back to the song, and suddenly the gap that he had in his muscle memory that was causing this Passaggio effect was, through the exercise, just removed. The gap was removed. It was filled in with new muscle memory, and he was just able to open his mouth and get exactly the sound that he was looking for. It was somewhere around a fuller neutral, approaching a metallic quality. So, at some stage, someone had told him, this note is where your Passaggio is, and it created almost like a mental block in his mind, like, yes, this is that evil place in my voice where I have to be really careful. And it kind of created a stumbling block for him in his technique. Yeah, that's the magic of the golden exercise, just solved that problem completely. So
yeah. So I think it plays into what's easier at what pitch, and we can't deny that it's easier to stick to a fuller density sound in the low part, and that it's easier to sing falsetto in the high part, just in terms of the amount of required energy. So if you are not precise with your technique, it's sort of like your voice decides for you, okay, we're gonna switch to falsetto here. And then you get that, oh, that yodel flip
effect
there.
Yeah.
And so traditionally, people are talking about the passaggio as, the specific place where you need to switch, where you need to transition into something else. And I think there are, several reasons for that, but the most obvious one for me is that since it comes from, classical pedagogy, classical singing comes with a certain sound ideal that needs to be respected for it, to sound appropriate for the style. And that, has some requirements of how different parts of the voice should sound. And the high notes should not sound too shrill, or, shrill, whatever shrill is for a specific genre. Something that's too shrill for classical might be ideal for gospel or rock. So I think that's part of the whole thing with the Passaggio. And as I said, it's undeniable that yes, I can sing higher in falsetto than I can in fuller density, but we can say that it's not necessary to switch at a specific place, because I can do and make that switch to falsetto at a specific place and go on. But I can also switch to choose to delay that switch a lot and go completely opposite, go more fuller density all the way up and more metallic, and do it's basically a matter of strategy. I think that Passaggio is not a fixed place in terms of pitch. If we're talking about what you need to change in your technique, you don't need to switch to a lighter laryngeal register, or whatever else, non-metallic, or that doesn't need to happen at a specific pitch. But so my reasoning behind it is you can also view it as sort of a part of the range where you suddenly need to pay more attention to what you're doing. There's less that you can get away with. So, there is a certain pitch. And for guys, it's often, you said for him it was E flat 4, somewhere around there, maybe F4, maybe F sharp 4, maybe G4, depending on the specific individual. For female singers, it could be around A4 or so. So it's sort of a part of the range where you will need to decide on your approach and stick to precise technique to manage, what happens in that part of the range. So that's sort of my reasoning. Well, both what it usually is taught as, which is in many methods, it's taught as the place where you need to make a switch, which it brings a certain sound. So for some styles, I would say that's actually necessary. But for some other styles, it's actually necessary not to do that. So that's one thing. But then also we can define it as a place where you sort of need to pay attention more to what you're doing and to choose what you're going to do, and make sure that your technique complies with the choice that you want to make.
I think that's the key point as well. It's this was a guy who came from a classical background and was told, here is your Passaggio. As you practice more, it may shift a little bit in the range, may be a little bit higher, but in this particular case, it was it's this note, it's this one again, and it kind of made that connection. And the thing is, he was singing a rock song, a classic rock song, and maybe the classical coordination that he had learnt before was creating a passaggio there. But for the song that he was singing, it wasn't really the ideal sound color for that song anyway. So yeah, we just went somewhere else. We went to Edge and just metallic transitions, you know. So we did some with Edge and some with overdrive, and and his Passaggio in this context as a classic rock singer was it was gone. It probably moved up somewhere like 5 or 6 notes higher.
Yeah. Sure. As I said, you know, at some point we are gonna be able probably to sing higher in falsetto than we will with fuller density.
Yeah.
But so it's definitely not a specific pitch range where you must switch.
Yeah.
Which is also interesting, the thing that you said, he was told that his passaggio point might shift. It also, you know, plays into the idea of voice types. Like, when I started out, I was told that I'm a baritone.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I think every male singer ever gets classified as a baritone, except maybe if they have a super low voice, and, you know, then they get classified as a bass. But, like, no one ever went to their first singing lesson and got told, oh, you're a tenor. Except if they've been already singing for a long time and were able to hit the high notes. And it's interesting. So yes, I was told I was a baritone, but then after a while I was told, like, oh, you grew into a tenor. Like, that's completely wrong. No, I became more skilled at singing high notes. Because if we dissect the statement, you grew into a tenor, you could say you shrunk into a tenor. Because if we're talking about vocal tract lengths and vocal fold lengths, higher voices will have shorter vocal folds and shorter vocal tracts. So you can't grow into a higher voice. You can only grow, if you're growing, then it's into a lower voice.
Yeah.
So to finish this off, you mentioned golden exercises. So we could maybe give a couple examples of, you know, good exercises for managing these register ideas. Or in this case, we would be talking about changing modes, changing densities, changing the amount of metal.
Absolutely. And this exercise is called the golden exercise because it really lives up to its name. It's such a useful tool because it doesn't just train your modes. It also requires a lot of coordination for your support as well. Because oftentimes during a highway metal to highway neutral transition, you will notice that as you leave the metallic area, you require maybe just a little bit more movement in your support to not go reduced density. And this can be quite a challenge for some people. They can create a full metallic sound, but the second they start to reduce the volume, they start to reduce the density with it. And that can cause then, at a certain volume, a yodel, a break into a falsetto sometimes. So staying on a highway coordination, a highway transition going back requires quite a bit of coordination for your support as well as your mode training. So it really does so much.
I think we gave some advices for that in our pop singing video as well.
Yes.
So
so check that out if you haven't seen it.
Yes. Actually, yeah. Check that out. We're not going to repeat what we said there.
No.
So we can do golden exercises going from fuller density overdrive or edge to fuller density neutral. But we can also choose to do it between densities. So sort of, you know, fuller density towards reduced density, or fuller neutral into falsetto neutral. Let's give some examples. Maybe you can do the one that you mentioned with metal to non-metal.
Yeah, so when you're training a metallic to a non-metallic and you just want to remain highway, you could take a overdrive, hey, and just from that point reduce the volume. And sometimes you might notice a reduction in the density, and that could result in something like that happening. This is a case where you should then pay attention to your support and maybe try and keep the sound softer as you leave the metallic part of the voice. What can also help if you reach a certain pitch and you struggle with your overdrive is to add some twang. Or just try out different amounts of twang and then try the transition again. Often twang helps with coordination. So this would be the highway transition. Then, of course, you can and should practice a highway to byway transition, which would then sound something like, hey, in that I hide my A behind a.
I'll suggest some more exercises, actually.
Yeah, go for it.
So, I mentioned the one where you go from a fuller neutral into a falsetto neutral, but actually as the first step, I try to get people to break on the same note, on the same pitch. So first you would start with like breaking to another pitch, like eh, then gradually sliding down towards the same pitch. So eh, eh, and then like breaking on the same pitch, eh, 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 eh. Or it can also be the same vowel. And then gradually working your way towards making that a more gradual transition. So and it took me quite a lot of practice to get there, but it's super useful, and I oftentimes suggest that to singers who want to get this seamless transition that you sometimes hear with more delicate genres, where singers seemingly go in and out of their falsetto without, it's sort of like you can hear they did do that, but it's sort of impossible to hear exactly at which place that happened. There's not an obvious break. And it's not an easy exercise, but I feel that it's super useful if you're looking to sing something in a bit more delicate manner through your range, through a lot of range.
Absolutely. And that's probably one of the most challenging transitions to do, the fuller neutral, to take and reducing it all the way through reduced density into falsetto is, it's also this is an exercise that a lot of my students hate.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh no, don't force me to yodel.
And it's kind of difficult to yodel on the same pitch because you sort
really
of
is.
want to go,
Yeah.
But I as I said, that's why I suggest going, sliding back to the pitch first, and then sort of training yourself like what the difference is, and then being able to do that very quickly.
But these exercises, I absolutely love them, because you can work on these exercises for like 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 40 minutes, and you really get the feeling at some point, I'm just not making any more progress now with my transitions. And sometimes you can work on it for, regardless of the amount of time, and think to yourself, I'm really not happy with my progress. And then you go back to a song and realize, oh my God, I'm on fire today. I can sing so well. Because even though it might not be like totally obvious that you've done loads of work, the second you start using your voice in a song situation, you suddenly notice, I can sing much more softly now than I could yesterday. And it's a very creeping process, this type of training, because you often notice the benefits when you actually go to the song, and not necessarily always immediate in the exercise. So, yeah, stick with it.
And if you're looking for a thicker sound all the way up, we've covered that quite extensively in our video on belting. So we break down what belting could be in CVT terms and like how to train that. So if you're looking to do those more dense, more metallic sounds, do check that video out, because you will find a lot of tips how to approach that there. And these transitions, I actually sometimes suggest learning those type of sounds even for singers who are looking for more delicate sounds but that are not falsetto, because I find if it's not falsetto, it's easier to go higher with metal. And then training with the golden exercises, the one you did going from metal towards neutral, training that transition once you have a good hold of the metallic sounds up there. So that's about it for today.
We really hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, share it with all your friends and family over all your social media platforms, and smash that like button, subscribe, and we have been thinking about some new ideas for the future, ways of getting our audience more involved in our content. There'll be more about that coming soon. Until then, take care of yourselves, stay safe, see you next time.
And leave us a comment about what you'd like to hear from us.